Hello, hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is your girl Mitzi, and this is Mitzi. Let's think about it. Today we are thinking about parenting. What does it give our kids? That's a real thinker. As a parent and so many out there, we really wonder what does it really give our kids. So luckily here I have Kyle who's going to help us really think about this and maybe put a perspective that maybe we don't think about often. So Kyle, how are you doing today?
I'm doing real good, Mitzi. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. Thank you for asking. I'm so glad to have you here. So let's just dive right in. I have to ask you, when you hear the word parenting, what does that first make you think about?
And that's a loaded question, isn't it? I think I think it's different for different people. But for me personally, I think it's creating a world where our kids can learn and thrive. I think is what it is.
Yeah, creating a world that our children can learn and thrive. And that's the hard thing is that sometimes as parents, we never know what is really going to be beneficial for our children or what's really going to hurt our children in the future. How do you go about that when you parent your children?
You know what? I think one of the best things we can do as parents is to really be thoughtful and even to the point where we kind of design a roadmap as to kind of what how we want to parent. Number one, and number two, where do we want to end up? I remember my wife and I one time were reading a book to our kids when they were little, and it was The Cat in the Hat. I'm sure you're familiar with The Cat in the Hat. And there's a point where Alice comes to a crossroads, and there's the no, not The Cat in the Hat. I'm sorry, Alice in Wonderland. I'm sorry, Alice in Wonderland is what I'm talking about, right? And she
Mhm.
comes to a crossroads. Alice comes to a crossroads, and there's the Cheshire Cat standing there. And she says, "Which way should I go?" And he says, "Well, where do you want to end up?"
Yeah.
And she says, "Well, I don't really care where I end up." And he said, "Well, it doesn't really matter which way you go. Just choose a way, and you'll end up somewhere." Right. And as we were reading this, my wife and I looked at each other, and I think we both came to the same conclusion. And it was, we're working so hard, we're trying so hard, and our kids are so crazy and wild, and they're so challenging. And we feel like there's so much stress in our home, and there's this chaos. And we'd never really sat down and said, where do we want to end up? We never really mapped out a plan for how we want to behave as parents and
Yeah.
where we want to end up as a family. And I think that was a really good, it was a good start for she and I to sit down and map out together where we wanted to end up with our family and kind of who we wanted to become in that process. And it,
Yeah.
and I think it really helped both she and I as well, because I'm kind of a strong willed guy. And my
Okay.
wife is a strong-willed woman. She was a strong-willed woman. And so I think we were both trying to kind of get our way, and it was causing conflict with our kids. And we weren't on the same page with raising them all the time. And our kids figured that out, and they started using that against each other. You know, they're slick. Kids are
Yeah.
slick.
Oh, they're smart.
And once we wrote it out, then we both became kind of what I call submissive to the mission. If our kids were doing certain things and we didn't know really which way to go, we would look at our mission and where we wanted to end up. And then she and I would agree on how we wanted to get there. And it wasn't about my ego or her ego. It was about how do we get to the end point together. And it
Yeah.
really allowed us to agree on a lot more things.
That's a valid point. And I think not a lot of people realize that when you're parenting, you are also rewriting your frame of mind as a parent. You know what I mean? Rewriting how we handle things and how we maneuver through life really does adjust in so many ways. And sometimes it's like in instances, you know what I mean? Because things are constantly changing with children as they grow up, as they evolve, as they get into things. So it does your life. So it's like you have to come back to you. And that's what it sounds like, is that you and her, you had to just reframe back to what your mission was, why you had the children, what was the purpose, what was the goal, and what did you really want to accomplish at the end? Because everything, all the little details, we get so lost in. We get so lost in the details, thinking it has to be such in a way where we forget it has to go back to us. Like the children really do reflect the parents, and sometimes I'll be looking at my boys and I'm just like, that's something I would do. Right? Isn't that, have you had those moments with your own children?
You know what? Many, many times my children have reminded me that we are the models for their behavior, right?
Yeah.
I remember one time I have five sons and one little girl, and
Oh, wow.
my and I remember one time my little girl was getting into something. She was up to no good, and I something was happening, and I said, and she started yelling at me,
Mhm.
and she was strong willed. She was trying to get away, and I said, "Don't you scream at me, little girl," and she said, "Don't you scream at me, Dad." And I realized, wait a minute, she's learned that yelling works through watching maybe me or her mom, or it
Yeah.
probably happened in our home. She was so small, right? And I thought, holy moly, she's figuring out how life works based on how our family works in a lot of cases, right? And how our
Yeah.
mom and how her mom and I interacted, and how her brothers and sisters interact, and all these different things. My wife used to say kids are like they're like velociraptors. Do you remember the movie Jurassic Park?
Yeah.
So they have the velociraptors in this big enclosure, and it's electrified fences around it.
Yeah.
And the velociraptors are testing those fences systematically every 10 minutes, all day long, every day. And if you remember the movie, they have to turn off the electricity for just 30 seconds, and the
Yeah.
velociraptors are out, and they take
Yeah.
over everything, and they run the island, right? And my wife used to say they're like velociraptors in that they're going to test, they're creative, they're smart, they're going to test the fences, and they're going to see what works and what doesn't work, and what does work they're going to keep doing, and they're going to learn how to get what they want or what they think they want. And as we as parents have to be careful that we don't give them things that are going to long term be harmful for them, right? Or give in to
That's true.
their whatever they try to do. And so it's not that they're being bad, they're just being kids, right? That's what they're
Yeah.
supposed to do. They're supposed to figure out how the world works. And the best place for them
Yes.
to do that is in our homes.
It's a very valid point that they are just figuring out how the world works. But it's like, when are we going to admit the fact that as parents, we're still figuring it out too, right? We're still literally trying to figure it out and what works, and we're trying to test boundaries along the way because we do it as well. We still do it. I think as humans, we're just supposed to just figure things out,
Yeah.
and we watch and we observe. And when you acknowledge that your youngest child has already picked up this trait of understanding how the family dynamic works, it's amazing because you think they're so young. Oh, how would they pick this up so soon? But I've realized, because I am the youngest, I realize the youngest really, we have to pay attention to keep up. You know what I mean? There's certain standards that it's an unspoken standard that people will say, "Oh, it doesn't happen." No, no. The youngest children, we have to pick up our slack, and we have to keep up with everybody else because man, I've been the little girl chasing after my mom in the mall because I couldn't keep up walking. And it's the same concept with just life. And I think once us parents start to have that like compassion for ourselves, we can have more compassion for our children because there was just certain moments where I would just get so angry with my son, but then I had to take a second and stop and just remember what's really happening here. He's just curious. He's just trying to figure it out. He can't mess with you. He can't go under your skin. That's not a real thing. You know what I mean? He's just trying to figure out life. So I love that you bring that up because I think more parents realize, okay, my child is just trying to figure out life. Then we can be the guidance along. It's like those roadblocks, you know what I mean? Or those lines on roads, it's just a fence. It's there to help you, guide you. If you actually hit the curb, boom, you're not going to flip over. But it's like sometimes we feel like those aren't there, you know what I mean? And we feel like we're flipping over. I mean, and I know you had so many more kids than me, and pretty sure they're a lot older by now. So have you had that moment with your children, and how did you handle that?
I think you're right. You're right. They need the guidance we can provide. You mentioned something earlier that I think is something that needs to be touched on is one of the things we can't do, or one of the things will cause us real problems, is my wife just, she was very, my wife was very feminine and kind and sweet. And she grew up in this world where there wasn't a lot of conflict. Her world was pretty, she had mom and dad there, and they were kind. And then she married me. And I came from a world of craziness and chaos. And
Okay.
And so when my first
Totally
couple of sons
different.
were, yeah, when my first couple of sons came along, she was like, what is wrong with these kids? Right? They're animals. And I said, well, yeah, that's kind of what kids are. And she would find herself, uh, you know, like you said, figuring it out, right? We're all still trying to figure out the world and how do we parent these kids. And I remember one day she was getting more and more frustrated, but then she started to get calmer and calmer and happier and happier. And I said, what is going on, Shelly? And she said, I learned a strategy that's helping me be a better mom. And I said, what is it? And she said, well, when I would scream at him or yell at him or just get onto him real angrily, I would feel guilty because I knew that really wasn't what I should be doing because they're just boys being boys, right? And so
Yeah.
she said, I came up with a strategy. I called it 100% AG. And I said, what does that mean? And she said, well, 100% AG to me means 100% accountability and then a whole lot of grace. The G is for a whole lot of grace. And she said, you know what? I'm not perfect.
No.
And my kids aren't perfect and none of us are perfect. So why should we expect ourselves to be perfect? She said, when I make bad decisions or when I do something that I shouldn't do as a parent, I feel guilty. And I think that tears me up so much. It makes me worse as a mom. It makes me, I don't have energy and I get tired and I get frustrated because I feel guilty. She said, so with 100% accountability and a whole lot of grace, when I make a mistake now, I take accountability for it. And sometimes I'll go to the kids and say, you know what? I didn't handle that very well. You made me mad and I shouldn't have got mad. You're just being a boy and I love you. And she would hug him and take accountability. And then she would forgive herself. She would give herself a whole lot of grace and she would go right back to being the kind of mom she wanted to be instead of letting the guilt and shame and discouragement overwhelm her and make her, unhappy. She would 100% accountability and a whole lot of grace, and she would buoy herself up with happiness. And I
Mm,
saw her. I would come home and she'd just be happier and happier. And I'd
mm.
say, "Did you have a great day?" And she'd say, "No, the boys were crazy, but I handled it, and I'm doing better because I've forgiven myself, and I'm going to keep." And what she ended up telling me was that she said, "We as parents we bleed into our kids if we're bitter and angry and
Yeah.
frustrated." That will bleed into our kids and our kids will feel that and they'll
Hmm.
become like that, right? She said it before. If we're loving and happy and kind, then that will bleed into them too. And she said the problem is it's so hard when they're so challenging. It's so hard to be happy and loving and kind. She said this strategy is allowing me to reset myself frequently, forgive myself. Guilt doesn't help me. Shame
Yeah.
doesn't help. What helps me is love, loving on
Yeah.
them, loving on myself. And I thought that was so smart because it allowed her to, instead of just saying, I'll never get this, I'm just a bad mom, I'll never figure
Mm.
this out, she was constantly saying, I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to keep working. I'm going to forgive myself. I'm going to give myself grace, but I am going to hold myself accountable when I mess up. And it was
That's
beautiful to
it.
watch her transition.
That is a beautiful thing. And I think that is even even more beautiful for the fact that you were able to not only watch her, but see it actually fall into place. And not just to be just words that go in vain or actions that go in vain. You actually got to see her words and actions create something beautiful because now her children have something that's from her that is beautiful. And it all comes from that grace and accountability. And I'm so glad you brought that up because I forgot about that. Because that is what one thing that I started leaning on too, because I noticed early that I was just angry. I was upset. Man, I would just try to escape for like 5 minutes at a time just to go to the bathroom and just cry because it was so overwhelming and frustrating. But it's like, how can you can't handle this as an adult because these are not adult situations. This is a parent, this is a child, this is something that doesn't know yet. Yet. The key word is yet. So it's like you and I need to remind yourself, how did you feel as a child? Okay, I felt like this. I just wanted to be loved. I just wanted to be hugged, or I just wanted my space. So now when I see my children, I kind of put myself there, and I have that accountability of like, and I have that grace. Thank God for grace. Oh my Lord, thank God I read a Bible verse. So I read these Bible plans every day off of the Bible app, and when I came across how it said that we have Grace is like a bank, and we have unlimited access to it and unlimited amounts of of draws and debits out of it because it never fully empties. It just always stays full. And after that, I was just like, okay, if my grace never goes empty and I have access to it at any given point, then that means that I can access it when I feel stressed or I feel frustrated or I feel overwhelmed or if I feel confused and I don't know how to handle the situation. And every time I dealt with something that was just so frustrating, like my kids ripping up the couch and taking all the stuffings out, and everything was just like cloud nine on the floor. And I'm just like, I just took a second and breathe. And I was like, it's okay. They're having fun. They're being imaginative. They're playing. How am I going to take their play away? Why am I going to say it's wrong? No, I'm going to be silent. I'm going to just clean it up, put it away, and we could figure out something else to play with. And it was fine. And it was so much of a different feeling and so much peace that afterwards that all I could do is just stare at my kids and just love them and just be so happy and grateful that I'm a mother and get to have that experience and it comes from that grace. So it's just like, I'm so grateful that you brought it up because sometimes I forget that it's there. You know what I mean? Like I forget that I'm acting on grace constantly. So it's a nice reminder to know another parent, a fellow parent out there is working on that accountability and grace because I think if we took that into perspective, we can have those moments of pause real quick. You know what I mean? And I think that power of pause is a real, real big thing. And for you in parenting, did you have to take a lot of moments of pause to have that reflection once she gave you that knowledge of what she was doing? Did that start coming something within you as well?
Yeah, it changed the way coming from an aggressive, violent background. My kids were afraid of me when they were little because they knew, right? And I realized watching her love them uh, into happiness made me realize that, you know what, at long term, fear or guilt or shaming your kids into behaving, they're going to feel controlled and they're going to want to escape, right?
Yeah.
But if like my wife, if you're loving and patient and kind, they feel empowered, right?
Hmm.
And you mentioned it earlier. If we have to give them the guidelines, we can't let them run amok, right? Because they don't have the knowledge or wisdom we have as parents. But if we give them the right guidelines, they can use their strong spirits to really go out and do some wonderful things in this world because we don't want to break their spirit and just damage that spirit. We want them to have that excitement and vigor and joy for life that allows them to do that. But it's so hard, like you said, when they challenge you every day, when they're tearing things up or breaking things, and you're just so frustrated. I I remember working with a family one time that had a little girl. I think the mistake we make as parents, I think we think it shouldn't be hard. Well, it is going to be hard. Okay.
Yeah.
Parenting is hard. So let's just get that out
Hmm.
of the way. Any parent that thinks my kids are going to be good, it won't be hard, you're wrong. It's going to be hard. Okay.
Hmm.
And I came across this mom and dad who had a little girl. I think she was 9 or 10. She wouldn't get ready for school. And
Okay.
they were so frustrated because she would fight them every morning going to school. By the time they got her to school, they were an hour. The mom was mad because she was late to school. The dad was going to work late. They were just angry. And so I met with them and I said, tell me what's going on. And they described it to me. I said, let's come up with a strategy that allows you to help her get dressed in a spirit of love. You have to stay in a spirit of love as you do this, right? And after we kind of developed a strategy, the dad said, you know what? It's my house and she's going to do what I say. That sounds like too much work. And I said, well, how's that going for you? And he said, well, it's not going well. I said, okay, then let's just put that aside. And then he said, it sounds like too much work. And I said, you know what sounds like a lot of work is an hour of fighting every morning. That sounds like a lot of work. I said, just try this. If she frustrates you, reset yourself in love and just stay with it and try this. Well, the very next morning I got a call from him. He was driving to work. He said it only took 30 minutes. We loved on her all morning. Mom loved on her. I loved on her. She's going to school on time. Mom is happy. I'm happy. I can't believe it worked. And it made me realize that as parents, we're all going to work hard. You're going to work hard. The question is, are you going to work at things that make you frustrated and angry and bitter and discouraged? Or are you going to try to figure out a way to work at it in a spirit of love so you feel empowered and you feel like you're a great parent and you feel like you're doing something that's going to help your child, right? Because they are going to be defiant. They are going to fight back. They're going to say no. They're going to want their way.
Yeah.
Let's just get that in. Let's lay that out there. The question is, how do we manage that, right? How do we put ourselves in a spirit of love and approach it from that direction and just stay there with them? And one way of working leaves you frustrated and angry and tired. The other way of working at it in a spirit of love leaves you feeling buoyed up. And it
Mm-hmm.
feels, you feel like, holy crap, that
Mm-hmm.
worked. And she's happy and mom's happy and dad's happy and the little girl's happy. This is really what we should be focusing on, is trying to parent in a spirit of love. And that's going to make everybody happier. And it's going to create a world where we can all be together in a state of happiness. And it doesn't have to be chaos and, arguments and frustration all the time.
Yeah, it's very valid. And I liked how you basically summed it up and saying you gotta work smart. You can't work hard. Can't work hard. I mean, you could put that in any job title, including parenting. You cannot there's no point of working hard because everyone's going to be drained. But when you work smarter and you do implement that love factor, it does change the game because at the end of the day, biology. We want to feel belonged, we want to feel accepted, we want to feel loved. So when you brought up earlier about how your parenting tactics, you realize that it was only going to push them away, it was going to get them out. We don't want that. And when you're in old age, I've seen I've taken care of people in their 80s and 90s in nursing homes and in their homes. And I've seen the families that were part of their lives and I've seen the families that did not care anything. Like I've seen people die by themselves. You know what I mean? And it's so sad, but knowing that they have family. You know what I mean? And it's so sad because it's like what makes you wonder like what did they do to deserve this, you know? And I don't think anybody deserves that. You know? And that's the hard thing to realize is that nobody deserves that. It's just that we have to remember our actions as parents affects us as we age and we grow older and especially in the United States, where we are such an individualistic society and culture, where we are so gun-ho of just being an individual and individualizing everything in life, we forget about the facts of being community. And we forget the fact of having that community, having family. And family and parenting, that's the point, right? Is to have kids, not just so that your genes can continue on, but to have family. Like I've spoken to people who always said, yes, I wanted a big family because I wanted to feel love. Chaos comes with love, but it's okay because I want the love factor. And I think that's the beauty of just being a parent and just having this experience is that you get to realize the bottom line is love, you know? And I'm so glad you brought up on that. So I have a quote here and I want to know your opinions on it when you hear it. So the quote goes, it's not what you do for your children, but what you have taught them to do for themselves that will make them successful human beings. What does that quote make you think about?
There's two things that I think about with this quote. One is emotional resiliency, right? I think it's important for us to allow our kids to make mistakes and allow them to suffer consequences, reasonable consequences. And then as parents, we can help them face those consequences and help them through those consequences. I think, you know, it seems like to me, and I think this goes to your quote, too many parents are trying to protect their kids from any suffering or any pain, and they try to protect them from any worldly things that can be hurtful or. And the reality is, they're going to face it anyway, right? When you step away, that you cannot escape pain or tragedy or suffering. It's part of the
Mhm,
human condition, right? And so
mhm,
when parents don't allow their kids to, or they save them from consequences, it's causing their kids problems because their kids are going to go out into the world. I used to tell my kids, the reason I discipline you when you're little is so that you'll know how to discipline yourself when you grow up because I love you. And the
mhm,
world doesn't love you. If you go out into the world and pull some of this stuff, they will throw your butt in jail and they will throw the key away. And
mhm,
that I don't want that. So I'm trying to help you learn discipline in our home and be a part of that so that when you go out in the world you can have discipline. And what that means though is it means sometimes our kids are going to be out there making mistakes and doing things they shouldn't and we kind of have to let them feel those consequences, right? So they can
Mhm.
say, you know what, this didn't kill me. I can learn my lesson. I can get stronger. And then we help them through the consequences. Sometimes those are harsh, right? We have to say, hey, let's not do that again. That hurt, right? And
Exactly.
and when we get out in the world, we don't want to suffer anything unnecessarily. So let's learn these lessons when we're little, and I think that's a big part of it is to teach them that the world is a tough place, and we're all going to suffer some pain, and we're all going to have
Yeah.
some tragedy in our lives. How do we develop enough emotional resiliency so that it doesn't just tear us down so badly that we can't recover? And
Yeah.
and that's a big part of it. So um, I
That's
think
very
that goes
valid.
along with your quote. That's what it makes me think of more than anything.
Oh, that's a very valid point. I really think those are some great points because we can't protect our children. I mean, we can protect our children to an extent, but we can only do so far. We can only go so far. Our lives can only go so far with our children. And that's the reason why I tell myself I'm preparing my children to become adults. You know what I mean? Because one day they're gonna live their lives longer as adults than they will as children. But it doesn't take away the fact that I'm gonna take away their childhood. No, they're gonna enjoy their childhood. They're gonna embrace that. But then they're also gonna remember that one day they're gonna wake up and they're gonna have adult problems and they're gonna know how to handle that. So that building that emotional resilience, like you said, is key point, and it makes me think of the movie Bubble Boy and
Oh yeah,
how his mom tried to protect him from the world and kept him in the bubble, and he just wanted to be defiant and escape and figure it out for himself, and he did, and he learned things his way. You know what I mean? The good, the bad, the ugly, but he was able to determine it for himself. And I think because life is so subjective and you can your children all grew up in the same house, but each one of them has a different perspective of you and your wife, it just parenting them, you know what I mean? And it's we have to take that into consideration that subjectivity is a real thing. So how we walk through life is not going to be the same, and we can't assume that just because I'm a parent and you're a parent, we're parenting the same, because we're not. We can't just assume one values has the same values as another, because not everybody's values and morals are the same. So it's just we once we grasp that as parents, we be able to understand like we got to put this knowledge that we have for our children so that they can grasp that understanding too and know how to deal with that. So that's a very good point. Goodness, this conversation is so well. I'm so upset that the time is escaping us. So I have to ask you, what can be some lasting words of wisdom that you can keep us off with to keep on thinking, even though, let's be honest, there's been a lot of great points in this conversation. What can be some lasting words?
I think probably I was talking with about a friend with this just recently, and he talked about when things get escalated, right? When the world starts to be exploding around you as a parent, and this happens frequently with our kids, right? It can. He said there's really it's important not to make decisions in the height of emotion, right? And he said if you can give yourself a little bit of space when things start to go crazy or wrong, if you can take a step or a beat and kind of step out of it just a little bit and think, right? And be conscious and make decisions not in that emotion, but in logical reasoning, right? And in love. And that's a we have in our family we have something we call you'll see there's a little I have a little wristband on here and there's the initials WAIT are on it. And the initials WAIT stand for what am I thinking? And I've taught myself and my kids when things get crazy is to ask yourself, what am I thinking? And if you're thinking anger or frustration or discouragement, those are they're not helpful, they're not productive, and you can't think those things in a spirit of love, right? So you have to
Mhm.
catch yourself in those moments and say, what am I thinking? And if it's not helpful, if it's not productive, then say, how can I face this in a spirit of love? And it changes the way you face everything. Even, I mean, you can be driving home from work and somebody can cut you off and you can get angry. And if you say, wait, what am I thinking? I'm angry. They just cut me off. But you know what? That's not helpful or productive. How
Mhm.
can I see this in a spirit of love? You can say, you know what? I'm not going to let this guy frustrate me. I'm just going to, maybe something's going wrong in his life. I'm going to relax. I'm
Yeah.
going to make my way home and I'm going to get home and see my family and be happy and smile. And it really does catching yourself in those heightened states and
Mhm.
being able to reset yourself quickly is a really powerful tool because we don't want to make decisions in the heightened state, right?
Exactly.
We want to take our time later on to look back at it and say, how can I do things in a spirit of love? And I think that's a great key. If we can practice doing things in a spirit of love, even in difficult moments, we're going to have a lot more success with ourselves and our kids.
Yes, I absolutely think so. It goes back to love. You gotta remind yourself. And I love that reality check, and I love that little band that you have because it is a great reality check. And we have to constantly put ourselves in that reality check mode because life can really take the toll on us. And if you're not careful, it can swift you away. So you have to always stand ground and have that foundation. And love is the greatest way to have any type of connection with the world because when you have love, man, animals feel it, plants feel it. You know what I mean? The energy is so surreal that you can't just not want to embody it. So just embrace it. So thank you for leaving us off with some words to think of because those are some great words. And if anybody out there in the audience would like to know more about Kyle and all that he has to offer to the world, well, go check him out. I have his photo on my website and I have access to his website on mine. So bloop right there, just click on it. And you can find all the great things that Kyle has to offer the world so that you can keep on thinking. So with that being said, bye.